The radio crackle was static as the final transmission came through. Mayday, Mayday, this is Eagle 6. I'm going down behind enemy lines. Then silence. For 72 hours, search and rescue teams scoured the mountainous terrain of occupied territory, finding nothing but wreckage scattered across an impossible landscape. Lieutenant Lisa Chin was officially declared missing in action, presumed dead. Her F-16 had been shot down during a reconnaissance mission deep in hostile territory, and surviving such a crash in that location seemed impossible. But Lisa Chin wasn't just any pilot. What happened during the 7 days she spent evading capture, surviving in conditions that would break most people, and making her way back to friendly lines would become the stuff of military legend. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in enemy territory isn't the one hunting you. It's the one you think you've already killed. Welcome to those who left a trace. Before we dive into this incredible story of survival, determination, and the warrior spirit that refuses to surrender, tell me in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today? And if you believe that true strength is measured not by how hard you fall, but by how you get back up, hit that subscribe button to support stories that honor the unbreakable human spirit. The morning sun cast long shadows across Bagram Airfield as Lieutenant Lisa Chun completed her pre-flight checks on the F-16 Fighting Falcon that would carry her on what intelligence designated as a routine reconnaissance mission. At 28, Lisa had already logged over 800 combat flight hours during her 2 deployments to Afghanistan, earning a reputation among her squadron mates as one of the most skilled and reliable pilots in the 455th Air Expeditionary Wing. The mission briefing had been straightforward. Photograph suspected enemy supply routes in the mountainous region near the Pakistani border, gather intelligence on troop movements, and return to base within 4 hours. Weather conditions were favorable, enemy anti-aircraft activity was reported as minimal, and Lisa's F-16 was equipped with the latest electronic countermeasures and defensive systems. "Chun, you're clear for takeoff," came the voice of Major Rodriguez, the squadron commander, through her headset. "Stay sharp out there. Intel says the area has been quiet, but that doesn't mean it's safe." Lisa acknowledged the transmission and began her taxi toward the runway, her aircraft heavy with fuel for the extended mission into territory that stretched the limits of her operational range. The F-16 responded to her controls with a familiar precision that had made her one of the youngest pilots ever selected for deep reconnaissance operations. As she lifted off from Bagram at 0630 hours, Lisa felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that accompanied solo missions into contested airspace. Flying alone over hostile territory required a level of situational awareness and decision-making that separated exceptional pilots from merely competent ones. The flight to the reconnaissance area took 90 minutes, following a route designed to avoid known enemy positions and radar installations. Lisa maintained radio contact with Bagram Control, providing regular position updates and status reports as she navigated through the complex mountain terrain that characterized Afghanistan's eastern provinces. "Bagram Control, this is Eagle 6, Lisa transmitted as she approached the target area. "On station and beginning photo reconnaissance run." The response came back immediately. "Roger, Eagle 6. You are clear for reconnaissance operations. Maintain current altitude and report any unusual activity." Lisa activated her aircraft's sophisticated camera systems and began the methodical process of photographing the valleys and ridgelines that intelligence suspected were being used as supply routes by Taliban forces. The work required flying precise patterns at specific altitudes, making her aircraft predictable and vulnerable to ground-based weapons. For 45 minutes, Lisa conducted her reconnaissance mission without incident. The photographs she was capturing would provide valuable intelligence about enemy logistics and troop dispositions, information that could save American lives in future operations. It was at 0847 hours that everything went catastrophically wrong. Lisa was completing her final photography pass when her aircraft's warning systems erupted in a cacophony of alarms. "Missile lock," the automated voice announced, indicating that enemy forces had targeted her F-16 with surface-to-air missiles. "Bagram Control, Eagle 6, I'm taking SAM fire." Lisa transmitted, simultaneously executing evasive maneuvers designed to break the missile lock. She deployed chaff and flares while diving toward the valley floor, using the mountainous terrain to mask her aircraft from enemy radar. The F-16's engine screamed as she pushed the aircraft to its performance limits, pulling G-forces that tested both machine and pilot. The first missile passed harmlessly behind her aircraft, confused by the countermeasures Lisa had deployed. But even as she celebrated the successful evasion, her warning systems indicated that multiple missile sites were now tracking her position. Eagle 6, this is Bagram Control. What is your status? Lisa was pulling her aircraft through a punishing turn when the second missile found its target. The explosion tore through the F-16's left engine and wing, sending the aircraft into an uncontrollable spin toward the rocky terrain below. Mayday, Mayday, this is Eagle 6. I'm going down behind enemy lines. Lisa transmitted, fighting to maintain control of her dying aircraft while preparing for ejection. The F-16 was falling like a stone, its control surfaces damaged beyond the ability to maintain stable flight. Lisa had seconds to make the decision that would determine whether she lived or died in the next few minutes. At 2,000 feet above the ground, with her aircraft disintegrating around her, Lisa pulled the ejection handle that fired her from the cockpit in a violent explosion of compressed air and rocket motors. The ejection seat carried her clear of the burning wreckage, and Lisa felt the jarring impact as her parachute deployed automatically. But even as she drifted toward the rocky slope below, she could see muzzle flashes from enemy positions that had spotted her descent. She was coming down in the middle of Taliban-controlled territory, miles from the nearest American forces, with no radio contact and minimal survival equipment. The chances of rescue seemed impossible, and the chances of survival seemed even worse. Lisa hit the ground hard, rolling across loose rocks and scrub vegetation that tore at her flight suit and equipment. Her parachute dragged her for several yards before she managed to disconnect the harness and take stock of her situation. She was alive, but barely. Her left shoulder was dislocated from the ejection. Her face was bleeding from multiple cuts, and her survival radio had been damaged during the landing. Worse, she could hear voices in the distance, enemy forces moving toward her position. Lisa gathered her survival gear and began moving immediately, knowing that her only chance of staying alive was to put distance between herself and the crash site before enemy forces could organize a search. What followed would be 7 days that tested every aspect of her military training, personal resilience, and will to survive. Lisa's first priority was finding cover before the Taliban forces reached her landing site. She could hear vehicles in the distance and voices calling to each other in Pashto, indicating that her descent had been observed and enemy forces were converging on her position. Moving through the rocky terrain with a dislocated shoulder and multiple injuries from her ejection, Lisa focused on the survival training that had been drilled into every combat pilot. Find cover, assess injuries, establish communications, and evade capture until rescue could be arranged. But as Lisa tried to activate her survival radio, she discovered that the antenna had been damaged during her parachute landing. Without communications, she had no way to signal her position to search and rescue teams, and no way to know if anyone was even looking for her. The terrain was brutally difficult, consisting of loose rocks, steep slopes, and sparse vegetation that provided minimal concealment. Lisa's flight suit, designed for cockpit comfort rather than wilderness survival, offered little protection against the sharp stones and thorny plants that tore at her clothing and exposed skin. After 2 hours of painful movement through the mountains, Lisa found a small cave partially hidden by fallen rocks. The opening was barely large enough for her to crawl inside, but provided crucial concealment from the enemy forces. She could still hear searching the area. Inside the cave, Lisa conducted a thorough assessment of her injuries and equipment. Her left shoulder was definitely dislocated, causing constant pain that made movement difficult. Her face and hands were cut from the rocky landing, and her survival equipment was limited to what she had been able to salvage from her damaged gear. Her inventory was sobering. 1 survival knife, a small first aid kit, 3 energy bars, 2 water purification tablets, a signal mirror, and a damaged radio that might work if she could repair the antenna. No weapons beyond the knife, no substantial food supply, and no way to communicate with friendly forces. But Lisa also possessed something that couldn't be inventoried. 28 years of physical conditioning, military training, and the mental toughness that had carried her through pilot selection and combat operations. She was alive when she should have been dead, and she intended to stay that way. As darkness fell on her first day behind enemy lines, Lisa could see lights from enemy vehicles still searching the crash site area. She used the cover of darkness to relocate to a more defensible position higher up the mountainside, where she could observe enemy movements while remaining hidden. The night was brutally cold at a high altitude, and Lisa's damaged flight suit provided minimal insulation. She spent the hours of darkness moving constantly to maintain body heat, while listening for sounds that might indicate enemy forces approaching her position. By dawn of the second day, Lisa had developed a survival plan based on her assessment of the situation. The enemy controlled the immediate area around the crash site, making rescue by helicopter or ground forces extremely dangerous. Her best chance of survival was to move toward American-controlled territory, a journey that would take her through approximately 40 miles of hostile terrain. Lisa began moving at first light, using terrain features to mask her movement from enemy observation. The dislocated shoulder made climbing difficult, but she had managed to fashion a crude sling from torn fabric that provided some support and pain relief. Her biggest challenge was water. The survival manual emphasized that humans could survive weeks without food, but only days without water, and Lisa's supply was already critically low. She would need to find water sources while avoiding enemy patrols that were undoubtedly searching for her. On the afternoon of the second day, Lisa encountered her first major test when she spotted a Taliban patrol moving along the valley floor below her position. 6 armed men were conducting a systematic search pattern, checking caves and rock formations where a downed pilot might seek shelter. Lisa pressed herself against the rocks and remained completely motionless as the patrol passed within 50 meters of her position. She could hear the men talking and see their weapons clearly, understanding that discovery would mean either death or capture, both options that she was determined to avoid. After the patrol moved on, Lisa continued her movement toward what she believed was friendly territory, using a combination of dead reckoning navigation and terrain recognition to maintain her general direction. Without GPS or detailed maps, she was relying on the basic navigation skills that were part of every pilot's training. By the end of the second day, Lisa had covered approximately 8 miles through some of the most difficult terrain she had ever encountered. Her energy bars were gone, her water was nearly depleted, and her injuries were becoming more painful as adrenaline gave way to exhaustion. But she was still alive, still moving, and still determined to make it home. The third day brought new challenges, as Lisa's lack of food and water began affecting her physical performance and decision-making capability. She was becoming dehydrated despite carefully rationing her remaining water, and the constant pain from her shoulder injury was sapping her strength. Lisa's pilot training had included survival instruction, but the reality of surviving in hostile territory was far more demanding than any classroom exercise. Every decision carried life or death consequences, and the physical demands of moving through mountainous terrain while injured were testing her limits. On the morning of the third day, Lisa discovered a small stream fed by snowmelt from higher elevations. The water was clear and cold, and after purifying it with her remaining purification tablet, she drank deeply for the first time since her shoot-down. The stream also provided an opportunity to clean her wounds and assess her physical condition more carefully. The cuts on her face and hands were healing, but her shoulder remained painful and limited her mobility. More concerning was her overall weakness from lack of food and the physical demands of survival. Lisa spent the third day following the stream downhill, reasoning that water sources would eventually lead toward populated areas where she might find food or assistance. However, she also understood that Taliban forces would use the same logic, making water sources potential locations for enemy ambushes. Her caution proved justified when she observed an enemy checkpoint position near a bridge crossing the stream approximately 2 miles downstream from where she had found the water. 3 armed men were controlling the crossing point, checking identification of local civilians, and searching for any sign of the downed American pilot. Lisa was forced to leave the stream and climb back into the rocky hills, adding miles to her journey, but avoiding contact with enemy forces. The detour consumed most of the third day and left her even more exhausted as she sought shelter for another cold night in the mountains. By the fourth day, Lisa was beginning to experience the effects of prolonged stress, inadequate nutrition, and sleep deprivation. Her decision-making was becoming slower, her physical coordination was deteriorating, and she was starting to hallucinate during periods of extreme fatigue. But her military training sustained her through the worst moments. The mental discipline that had carried her through pilot selection and combat operations enabled her to focus on immediate survival tasks, even when her body was failing. Lisa's breakthrough came on the afternoon of the fourth day when she discovered evidence of American military activity. Empty MRE packages and cigarette butts that indicated a recent presence by U.S. forces. The discovery gave her hope that she was moving in the right direction and might be approaching areas where rescue was possible. However, the same area also showed signs of recent combat activity, including bullet impacts on rocks and evidence of IED explosions. Lisa realized that she was entering a contested zone where both American and Taliban forces operated, making her situation both more hopeful and more dangerous. That night, Lisa heard the distant sound of helicopters, but she was unable to signal them with her damaged radio. The aircraft passed overhead without detecting her position, and she spent the night wondering if search and rescue operations were continuing or she had been declared dead. The fifth day brought Lisa's closest encounter with enemy forces when she inadvertently walked into a Taliban camp that had been established in a valley she was trying to cross. Only the alertness of a guard dog prevented her from walking directly into the camp, giving her seconds to retreat before being discovered. Lisa spent hours crawling through rocky terrain to circle around the enemy position, adding significant time and distance to her journey. The encounter reminded her that the enemy was actively patrolling the area and that her survival depended on maintaining perfect concealment. By the sixth day, Lisa was operating on willpower alone. Her food had been gone for 3 days. Her water supply was limited to what she could find in natural sources, and her physical condition was deteriorating rapidly. But she could sense that she was approaching American-controlled territory based on changes in the terrain and decreased enemy activity. Her instincts proved correct when she observed an American patrol in the distance on the morning of the 7th day. Lisa's first glimpse of American forces came at dawn on the 7th day, when she spotted a patrol of soldiers moving along a ridgeline approximately 1 kilometer from her position. Through her survival training, she had learned to identify friendly forces by their movement patterns, equipment, and tactical formations, and these soldiers were unmistakably American. However, Lisa faced a critical challenge: how to make contact with the patrol without being mistaken for an enemy combatant. She was wearing a torn and dirty flight suit, carried no identification visible from a distance, and her appearance after 7 days in the wilderness would make her difficult to recognize as an American pilot. Lisa decided to use her signal mirror to attract the patrol's attention, flashing reflected sunlight in a pattern that military personnel would recognize as a distress signal. She waited until patrol was in position where they could observe her general location, then began signaling according to the survival protocols she had memorized. The response was immediate but cautious. The patrol stopped their movement and took defensive positions, clearly aware that someone was attempting to signal them but uncertain about the identity or intentions of the signaler. Lisa continued her signaling pattern while slowly moving toward higher ground, where she would be more visible to the American forces. She could see soldiers using binoculars to scan her area, and she realized that they were trying to identify her before making contact. Drawing on her remaining strength, Lisa climbed onto a rock formation that provided clear visibility from the patrol's position. She removed her torn flight suit jacket and waved it overhead in a pattern that clearly indicated she was trying to surrender or make peaceful contact. The patrol's response suggested they had identified her as potentially friendly, as several soldiers began moving in her direction, while others maintained overwatch positions. Lisa could see that they were approaching tactically, ready for combat if the situation proved to be an enemy trap. When the lead soldier was within shouting distance, Lisa called out using the identification protocols that every American military member knew. Friendly, American pilot, don't shoot. The soldier, a sergeant with the 101st Airborne Division, approached cautiously with his weapon ready, but not directly threatening. "Ma'am, I need you to keep your hands visible and identify yourself clearly." Lisa raised her hands, showing that she was unarmed. "I'm Lieutenant Lisa Chun, United States Air Force. I was shot down 7 days ago. My aircraft was an F-16 on a reconnaissance mission out of Bagram. The sergeant's expression changed immediately as he recognized that Lisa was indeed the missing pilot his unit had been briefed about during their deployment. "Ma'am, are you injured? Do you need immediate medical attention?" Lisa felt a wave of relief so intense that her legs nearly gave out. "I'm injured but mobile. My left shoulder is dislocated and I'm dehydrated, but I can walk." The sergeant activated his radio while two other soldiers provided security. "Base, this is Alpha 3. We have located the missing pilot. Subject is alive and conscious. Request immediate medical evacuation." The response came back immediately. "Alpha 3, Roger. Medical evacuation is en route. Secure the area and prepare for helicopter landing." As the patrol established a defensive perimeter around Lisa, the sergeant provided her with water and began assessing her medical condition. "Ma'am, can you tell me what happened during your time on the ground? Did you have any contact with enemy forces?" Lisa accepted the water gratefully, drinking slowly to avoid overwhelming her dehydrated system. "I evaded enemy patrols for 7 days. They were actively searching for me, but I was able to avoid contact through concealment and movement." The sergeant nodded, making notes that would be included in his after-action report. "Ma'am, there's been a search and rescue operation ongoing since you went down. Multiple aircraft and ground units have been looking for you." Lisa felt another wave of emotion as she realized that her military family had not given up on her, even when the odds of survival seemed impossible. "Sergeant, how did you know to look for me in this area?" The sergeant smiled for the first time since making contact. "Ma'am, we didn't know you were here specifically. We're on a routine patrol. You found us as much as we found you." 20 minutes later, Lisa heard the distinctive sound of helicopters approaching her position. A medical evacuation helicopter, escorted by 2 Apache gunships, was coming to bring her home. As the medical helicopter settled onto a makeshift landing zone that the patrol had prepared, Lisa felt the same mixture of relief and gratitude that every rescued service member experiences. She was going home, but more importantly, she had proven to herself that survival was possible even under the most desperate circumstances. The flight medic who treated Lisa during the evacuation flight was amazed by her condition. "Ma'am, considering what you've been through, you're in remarkably good shape. Most people wouldn't have survived 3 days in that environment." Lisa looked out the helicopter window at the mountainous terrain where she had spent 7 days fighting for survival. "I had good training and a lot of motivation to get home." The medical evaluation at Bagram revealed the full extent of Lisa's ordeal. She had lost 18 pounds during her 7 days on the ground, suffered dehydration that required 4 fluids, and sustained injuries that would require weeks of recovery. But she was alive and would make a complete recovery. More importantly, the intelligence she had gathered during her reconnaissance mission, combined with her observations during 7 days of movement through Taliban-controlled territory, provided valuable information that will be used in future operations. Colonel Martinez, the wing commander, visited Lisa in the hospital the day after her rescue. "Lieutenant Chun, what you accomplished over the past week goes beyond anything we train for in survival school. You've demonstrated the kind of courage and resilience that defines the very best of our Air Force." Lisa was still processing the magnitude of what she had survived. "Sir, I just did what I was trained to do. I never gave up hope that someone would be looking for me." Colonel Martinez nodded. "Lisa, we never stopped looking. But more than that, you never stopped fighting. That's what brought you home." The story of Lisa's survival became legendary within the Air Force community, used as an example in survival training courses, and as inspiration for pilots facing their own challenges. But for Lisa, the most important outcome was simpler. She had proven to herself that the human spirit, properly trained and motivated, could overcome seemingly impossible odds. 6 weeks later, Lisa returned to flight status and resumed combat operations. She continued flying reconnaissance missions over Afghanistan, but now she carried with her the knowledge that survival was possible even in the most desperate circumstances. Her fellow pilots treated her with the respect accorded to someone who had been tested under the worst possible conditions and had emerged victorious. But Lisa deflected the attention with typical pilot humor and focus on the mission. The best survival technique, she would tell younger pilots, is not getting shot down in the first place. But if it happens, remember that giving up is not an option. 3 months after her rescue, Lisa was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for her actions during the reconnaissance mission and her survival behind enemy lines. The citation noted her extraordinary heroism and exceptional devotion to duty while evading capture in hostile territory. But for Lisa, the real award was much simpler. She had kept her promise to herself and to her fellow service members that she would never give up, never stop fighting, and never stop trying to come home. The pilot they declared missing and presumed dead had proven that reports of her demise were greatly exaggerated. She had survived 7 days in enemy territory not through luck, but through training, determination, and the unbreakable that defines America's finest warriors. Have you ever faced a situation that seemed impossible to survive? Lisa Chen's story reminds us that the human spirit, when properly prepared and absolutely determined, can overcome challenges that seem to defy all odds. Subscribe to Those Who Left a Trace if you believe that giving up is never an option and that the greatest victories are often achieved by those who refuse to surrender even when defeat seems certain. We'll see you in the next story, where we'll continue to honor those who prove that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to keep fighting even when fear seems overwhelming.